all of you to the June edition of the HomeNE Learning Network, which is developed as a statewide learning network for individuals to share ideas and thoughts and learn from each other about housing challenges and housing solutions. So thank you for joining us. South Central Economic Development District is the lead agent for HomeNE, and today we have the pleasure of hearing from Robin Geiser. She is the housing director at Cozad Development Corporation, as well as the Gothenburg Improvement Company. So that in itself is a unique endeavor, and in speaking with her during practice, it was fun to hear how they make that work. So Robin, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to you and to our HomeNE Network listeners. And thanks for coming along and sharing your story with us today. Before you begin, Robin, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. First off, thanks for having me. I obviously love to talk housing, and I think there is nothing more important in the state of Nebraska than sharing with one another and learning from one another. So thank you again. I am a mother of two grown boys, Logan and Dylan. My husband Scott and I own a business in downtown Cozad. We own 222 Hardware, which is an endeavor we took on about 4 years ago. So we're still new to that game, but that's been a lot of fun. I call myself a serial volunteer. I think between my husband and I, we volunteered for every local committee, board, that there is. And I think that's really important in rural Nebraska, being involved and giving back to your community. And probably the part that I'm playing today is an advocate for every one of you. I think the work that everybody across the state is doing is really important to keep Nebraska alive and vital and vibrant. And so I'm an advocate. If I can help anybody, I will.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for that introduction to yourself, Robin. Go ahead and let's launch into your presentation for today.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to grab control here. It's not letting me this time. There we go. We talked about having technical difficulties, and now we're going to.
It never happens till you're live, right?
Right? Okay, Sherry, it says I can control your screen, but it's not turning green. There it went. Okay. As Lori said, this is kind of a unique situation. There it went away again. I work for both Cozad and Gothenburg, and this particular collaboration is new, but partnering in Dawson County isn't new.
Robin, mine says that it's waiting on you. Do you want me to just advance?
It keeps turning from yellow to green.
Okay.
So if you want to just advance slides, we're going to go that route, if you don't mind. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, one of the very first things that I think every community should do, if they have not already done so, is engage in some sort of housing study or housing research to really understand and identify what your needs are. And Cozad has been doing this with Dawson area development for many, many years. And what I'm showing you on the screen right now is the most recent. This was completed in February of 2022. And it shows Cozad with a housing unit target demand of 126 and Gothenburg 88. And I share this because that starts to paint the picture of how many houses we need to build in the next 5 years to meet that housing demand. And that's saying That's our demand if we have no economic development type projects that would boost those needs. So the other thing that I want to point to on this, when we looked back to our study 5 years previous, for COSAT alone, our target demand went up by 43%, which means we weren't keeping pace with what we were doing as a community in order to make a difference or move the needle. Next slide. And I share this because this isn't a new problem. And I would about guess that you all have very similar situations in your community. I was the economic developer for COSAD for 11 years. Some of you I know and knew you in that capacity. These were things that I had heard from the businesses 6 years ago when I was in that role. And looking back at some of the documentation that was shared with me from an old chamber bucket of files, these things went back to 1978. It's the exact same messaging. If I went to my employers prior to me starting, it would have been the exact same thing they were telling me right now. And I'm sure probably the same things every one of you here in your own communities. Next slide. So when I think about, okay, what's different now as I come into this organization in a little bit different role than I played previously? Did they win the lottery? Did they, land a bucket of money I didn't know about? Because when you look at our housing study, COSAD, in order to meet that demand, we need $28.4 million. Gothenburg needs 19.9. And I promise you, neither one of them have that kind of budget or have that kind of money. So I say that though, we did kind of win the lottery. And if you'll go to the next slide, we both received rural workforce housing funds. And that is spurring everything that I will talk about with you today. And you're going to hear me say development spurs development. And that is a truthful statement. And part of it will come directly from the impact we're having in our rural workforce housing program. COSAD has $1.4 million and Gothenburg has 1.8. And to date, they are 100% leveraged, as well as we've leveraged other private funding because of this. Next slide. The big question was, how are we going to effectively manage and deploy these funds? And, having the money is step one, but step two is how do we effectively get those monies out the door? And this is unique in the fact that if many of you know the rivalry that exists between COSAD and Gothenburg, we are 10 miles apart. On Friday night at the football field or at the basketball court, volleyball, it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to compete against one another. And depending on who the home team is, they're going to say they want to win. There's just no doubt about it. But they understand that working together, we can effectively improve our own communities while improving another community as well. And so the leadership from both COSAD Development Corporation and Gothenburg Improvement Company came together to create this full-time position. They knew they didn't have a need for a full-time person, and maybe not that the need didn't exist, but the funding didn't exist to support it, especially when you're starting something new. So allowing this opportunity for us to work together and start to see how we were going to be successful, it's a little bit easier to justify those budget line items. So they both utilize local option sales tax to fund this position, and they also wrote for a NIFA community outreach grant and were successful in receiving those funds. Next slide. If any of you saw my presentation at the NIFA conference, I'm gonna apologize because a lot of this is going to be a repeat to you, but this particular slide was at the end of my presentation there, and I have moved it up. And I left it at the end because I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to stress how important this is. And then as I thought more on that, I moved it to the front because this is one of those things that I think has to be the second thing you do in your job if you haven't already done so. I set up a meeting in Cozad and one in Gothenburg, and I invited as many local contractors to the table, and not just construction, general contractors, plumbers, electricians, the yard guys, whether they were just sprinkler guys, whether they did seeding or sod, you know, you name it, we invited them to the table. Because I wanted to understand what their capacity was to help us address the situation. Obviously, they have been working in our communities, know our communities, and are passionate about our communities, just like we are. So why weren't they taking on more projects? Why hadn't they speculated on housing? And how could I get them involved in the process? So I had a small survey, and I will tell you it's generic, but I will share it with any of you. So if you want it, message me and I will get it to you. But it was just a starting point. It allowed us to have conversations around why they hadn't been involved, what their capacity is to do projects in the community, and could they partner with someone else if they didn't think they themselves had the capacity to take a project on their own. And I will tell you, we've already seen some success stories. I have a small contractor who is a single gentleman. He has no employees, but he has taken on a project. He is doing a flip for me, and he is utilizing some of the connections that he made during that meeting. And I will tell you the other side of this, where there were guys there that said, yes, I absolutely would love to be a part of this and I would build a home from ground up, but I am booked until 2024. So I asked those questions. Is it now? Is it later? What does that timeline look like? What's your capacity? Because the other thing that I'll tell you, and this is the reality of the work that we do, we sometimes get pushback from people. And I'm going to tell you, I'm extremely transparent in this. I wished it were not this way, but I have contractors working in my community that don't live here. And I will get the question, why are they doing these jobs and not our local contractors? And I have the answers. I can say, we have talked to them. They are busy building their own projects. They will be involved in our projects, but not until 2024 or whatever the timeline is. I come armed with the answers before it becomes a problem that people are going out having those negative conversations. Because unfortunately, the work that we do is hard enough as it is without having people not be supportive of the activities that we are doing. And so I would encourage all of you, if you haven't had these conversations, it's really cheap. I will tell you, we ordered pizza and wings and Jen got some beer, not out of our rural workforce funds, not out of any tax dollars, out of our appropriate funding sources, but for a very inexpensive, because I will tell you, these guys are busy and they want to know as well what's going on and who's doing the work. And it might also create a relationship with someone else that might help them along the way. So I would encourage everyone to do this if you haven't done it. And like I said, I have a really generic survey I'm willing to share. You can change using whatever way that you want. So if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to ask. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects that we've completed. And again, I'm going to talk about development breeds development. And Cozad, I'm going to start with this project. This triplex that's in the back of this slide was a LIHTC and Home Funds project that actually started before I came to work here as the housing director. This project was in the works. The first week I was here, we did the groundbreaking. This project dates back though, when I was the economic developer, when we transferred the land that this project eventually went on. So again, don't be discouraged if things don't happen as quickly as you want them to. Sometimes it takes that diligent, constant effort for fruits of your labors to pay off kind of thing. Next slide. This is another project that, as the economic developer, my board had tried to buy these properties. And if you'll flip to the next one, there are actually 4 of those little houses that sat there, all looking identical to the previous picture. We had tried multiple times. Individual board members went after buying these properties. We could never get control of them. After our rural workforce funds were announced and I did my local contractors meeting, I had a contractor come up to me and say, hey, I just have a relationship with him, the previous owner of this property. And he said, he's agreed to sell me those 4 houses. And I said, fantastic. I want this to be our first project. So these are rental units that he created, complete renovation. They were gutted to the studs, new windows, new siding. I mean, really nice 2-bedroom, 1-bath units that are now rented. And I can't stress enough, if you're not familiar with my community, these houses sat right across the street from our public library, catty corner from our Veterans Memorial Park, just on the north edge of our downtown. They were the biggest eyesore and had been for 20 years or more. And I can't be more proud of what this contractor has been able to create. And these are units I would have lived in if I needed a rental unit, or if my kids were moving here and needed a rental unit. I wouldn't have a hesitation whatsoever to get them moved into these. And I could never have said that before. So that was our first success story. Next slide. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly so that we can offer enough time for questions. But CDC, with their funds, has been the general, and these projects are funded with our rural workforce. I'm generaling these. They're all 3-bedroom, 2-bath, ranch style homes. In Cozad, we can't have a basement, so these do not. But we will sell these at $299.9, and I actually am hoping maybe by the end of the month these all hit the market. So we're getting really close. Next slide. Again, development spurs development. So the picture on the left of the duplexes, the builder who built our triplexes, with his involvement in the community, I had reached out to him and said, would there be anything else that you'd be willing to do? We wanted to make every chance we could get to keep him working in our community. And so they actually took on that project themselves. They don't have any of our money involved in it. And then his son came along and is still doing work in our community as well with his dad. And we said, okay, how do we keep you here? And he's building 5 single-family homes. We've structured those a little bit differently. I'm using private funds for those, not our rural workforce, but we are making sure that it does align with all of the rules of the rural workforce in case I do need to utilize those funds for these projects, because I've guaranteed the purchase of these homes through a contract if they aren't sold within 30 days of an issuance of a certificate of occupancy. And I say that because sometimes we have to be creative. We got to think outside of the box. And I will tell you, that's the one thing that I love about the rural workforce housing funds, because they have been written in such a way that it gives us flexibility that not all programs do. So, don't be afraid to think about how you might structure a deal and how that looks maybe a little bit different than any other housing projects that you've done. Next slide. We're going to go to Gothenburg. And the one thing that I'm going to start out with and stress, Cozad and Gothenburg, though we are separated by 10 miles and our communities are similar in size, we compete in the same conference, all of those types of things, the needs in both communities are extremely different. Gothenburg has a higher median income than Cozad's by more than $10,000 a year. So they don't have the same need in income-based properties as we do in Cozad. Their market is much higher. I can speculate on a house that might sell for 400 to 600,000 much faster than that's ever going to move in Cozad. Next slide. So our first subdivision in Gothenburg was a 13-lot subdivision. Our first phase was 4 homes utilizing our rural workforce funds. We have sold 3 of those to date, and we've already started 5 more. So these pictures show you the under construction that we have right now. Those are all 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They do all have unfinished basements that include at least 2 egress windows. I really wish that Cozad could build on a basement foundation, but that just doesn't happen with the water table that we have. And again, we're only separated by 10 miles, so you wouldn't think it would be so dramatically different, but it is. Next slide. These were examples of the houses that we've sold. Next slide. The community had already started on a project with Heritage Homes, and there are 4 in these pictures. We actually have 6 in place now. These are all 3-bedroom, 2-bath, either have an attached or detached garage. These are sitting on a crawl space. These don't have basements because in this particular area in Gothenburg, again, because of the water table, they cannot have basements in this area. This land was owned by the CRA, and GIC acquired that and created a really nice subdivision. There are some income-based properties that surround this and some rental properties, and this is directly across from the city shop. So, you know, it was a neighborhood that had been underutilized. I've heard some stories from the locals that they used to have a lot of pickup games and so forth on this particular tract of land, but everybody that I have spoken to has been really excited about having the neighborhood finished, if you will, and getting these houses in place. We have 4 of them on the market right now, and hopefully by the end of August, the others will be ready to go on the market as well. And I hope to have a really big ribbon cutting down there to showcase these 6 homes. Next slide. And these are examples of the houses that we built not utilizing rural workforce. And this is, I have these in here to illustrate, again, the differences of these 2 communities. All 5 of these homes were sold before they were completed. One of them, we barely even had the footings in the ground and we were under contract. So the demand over there is very, very different, and the community understands that. And so we've been able to leverage other funds to make projects like this work where our rural workforce housing funds are not appropriate. And that's one of the things that I think understanding exactly what the needs of your community are make it a little bit easier for us to find the right solution and what that magic calculation of how many units in each one of these categories. You know, sometimes that might not be our forte, but hiring the right professionals to do that for us and allocate that allows us to take the time to be focused on how we find the tools or identify the tools that we need to address those needs. Next slide. And I absolutely can't stress this enough. And we have to find a way to yes. And in rural communities, this is hard. And I understand that it's hard. It's hard for me, just like it's hard for you. Again, trying to be as open-minded about how a contractor might need us to partner with them takes us to be a little bit creative. I know when we were doing our practice, we were talking about how we funded projects. Do we fund them 100%? Do we fund them via a portion? And I want to say the answer to all of those things is yes. You might have to do all of those things in order to get a deal done. We might have a project that requires us to have some down payment assistance as part of the solution. So I I want everyone to know it isn't a one size fits all. And if there are takeaways that you can take from what I've shared with you today, but say that doesn't work completely for my community, but if I tweaked it like this, we could make it work. And I do really think that's why we share, because maybe something doesn't work, or maybe something didn't work in your community, but might work in another community. And I think being open and honest about the projects that have worked, what successes we've had, maybe even some of the failures that we've had. And I will tell you, one of the things that I'll say, we've been really fortunate so far in all of our projects to this point that we have made a profit on them. That won't be the case always. And we have a project that we might not make money on, we might lose some money on, but we're still getting the rooftops. We're still getting the housing units in our communities. We're moving the needle on the deficiency that we have in the housing stock that we have. So we have to take that as a win also. And so being open to maybe some of these missteps or things that don't maybe go exactly as you planned, because that's the other side of this. We're building in a time that has more at risk and at stake and more change, I think, than any one of us have ever seen in our careers. And I go back to, if it were easy, they'd all be doing it. I sometimes wonder, are we all a little bit crazy because we continue to do it? But, and I think, again, the answer to that is yes, but we have to keep doing it if we want to make a difference in our communities. And that's what it's all about. Next slide. And again, I'm an open book. My cell phone number's on there. My email's on there. Because I do travel between both communities, my cell phone is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Shoot me a text. And again, I'm willing to share anything that we have done or utilized. I will tell you, I also sit on the committee for the Dawson Area Development's Rural Workforce, and what we're doing with those funds has been very different than what we're doing in both Cozad and Gothenburg. And so if there's anything that I glean from that that might be of help to any of you, again, I'm willing to share that knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. So what questions do you have for Robin this afternoon? We do have one individual wanting your survey, Robin. So we'll provide you that contact information. So you can get that. And if you just want to send that to us too, that's fine. But
Perfect.
What questions do you have for Robin?
Robin, you mentioned if you were looking at steps, number one would be the housing study. Number
Yes.
two would be the local contractors. Number three would be what?
I would take a look at who's building in your area. And by area, you know, that could be different from one community to the next. Maybe your geographical service region is 30 or 60 miles or whatever it is. Look in that area and see builders who are building in multiples. Because again, that's one of the things that is so difficult in this climate that we're in. The developers, the contractors need to reach economies of scale, and they can only do that if they're building more than one. And that's the issue a lot of times with our locals. They don't have capacity to build 3 or 4 or 5 at a time. And so that's what's kept them out of the game. But there are those contractors out there that's exactly what it will take. And I will tell you, going back to, say, 15 years ago, we did that as a county and had a builder who built, say, 10 in Lexington, 5 in Cozad, 5 in Gothenburg, because that was the only way we could draw somebody out to the area to build. So getting an inventory of those builders out there and start to have conversations with them. Maybe they hadn't been welcomed to your community before, might be the only reason why they hadn't done a project with you. Sometimes it's that they're not informed, they're busy enough. And so unless someone hands them some of that information, if you can hand them a housing study that says here the need exists, because again, they're running businesses. They want to know they can make money doing this. So the more data that we can give them that would prove our point that we would be a great community for them to work in, the better off you're going to be. So, you know, have those conversations with those contractors that maybe don't live in your community, but maybe would work in your geographic region.
So my follow-up question to that is, when you're ready to embark on a project, do you put more focus on what you want to do or what the environment is going to open doors for? What the contractors that are available are willing to do, what the quick win might be, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I will tell you, I think, again, every situation is a little bit different, and you do have to take into account all of those things. You know, I might have a contractor who is only capable of doing flips. So how do I get him engaged in working in my community? Do I have a contractor that maybe needs to have some help in identifying who his subs would be on a particular project? I'll help with that. You know, so I think it's going to change, Sharon, with really every project. And I can anticipate that though I'm trying to keep the contractors that are building in my community here, as long as I can keep them, I also have to know that I have to continue those conversations with others in case they leave to go start a project, say in one of your communities.
Thank you.
Robin, I'm curious, do you know what your percentage is on what you're doing for purchase, rehab, resale versus new construction?
So right now in COZAD, I have 4 purchase, rehab, resale, or reno for rentals. And I have 8 single family construction, new construction. And in Gothenburg, everything has been new construction to this point. And again, that's just identifying the differences in the community. They have done an exceptional job of keeping up on nuisance properties, and they just, not that they don't have any, but in comparison, the percentage that they have versus COZAD is different. I anticipate we will have to also start doing that a little bit more in Gothenburg, but we were trying to attack the new construction because we had builders in town who would do that. And so that's the channel we're taking, making our priority right now. But I do anticipate over time, we will have to start to split that. But I don't think it will ever be even a 50-50 split. I still think it would be a smaller percentage. But I do think we have housing stock, and you guys all understand the cost of construction has gone up so much that in order for us to continue to leverage those dollars and create those housing units and have the impact that we need to have, we're going to probably get much further by doing a purchase, rehab, resale and keep those prices down. But again, that's probably far more important in COZAD than it is in Gothenburg, just based on my community demographic.
Okay, I do have a question in the chat box for you, Robin. Who is covering the cost of infrastructure if new subdivisions are being developed? Or are these just on infill with infrastructure already in place? And then the third part of that is, what tools are being used to fund the infrastructure?
So in the 2 subdivisions that we're working in COZAD and in Gothenburg, they use tax increment financing to make these new developments. And I know that we will continue to utilize that. Infrastructure is probably the biggest obstacle that we will face. And I know in this last round of rural workforce, you know, it was allocated that you could utilize some for infrastructure there. I think there was a little bit more emphasis put on that because I think that is a bigger problem for communities. In COZAD, because I only have 3 lots left, in the subdivision that I'm currently working in, I'm identifying right now where my infill lots will be, where my projects will go, because I'm trying to have 5 to 10 projects in the hopper so that we can just keep rolling forward in order for me to keep my contractors working for me. In Gothenburg, we are working on an entirely new subdivision, and that will be a tax increment financing project as well. But it will come out in phases. You know, I think our first phase will have 14 more lots on it, but we aren't moving forward with that one just yet. We're doing the engineering for that subdivision, but I would guess by spring of next year, we will be moving forward with that one.
Okay. The mention of TIF for your projects has stirred the question about how do your school districts feel about using TIF for housing?
And I will tell you, in both of our communities, because our partners at the schools are sitting at the table, they've all had challenges filling jobs in both communities, that they understand the benefit of this for their ability to attract new. And I will use an example in Gothenburg. They had to hire a new superintendent, and though the new superintendent came in-house, locally, they recruited one of the candidates for a principal's position, and she relocated her family to the community in one of our new market rate houses. And so they know that without the houses, they are not going to be able to grow their workforce. And so, though it's not always the most popular tool because of the impacts to the hospital and school, I think if you have those honest conversations and you keep the dialogue open with them and understand the challenges that they are having, they've understood that this is one of the limited tools we have to impact housing and the infrastructure needed to develop those subdivisions.
Okay, great. What other questions do you have for Robin? As people are thinking, did you mention what the Wakefield subdivision price points are? Did I miss that?
So those, we started out at 289 on those, and I anticipate we're going to have to take a price reduction on those, or maybe do something, whether that be a down payment assistance or, you know, I think we're going to have to look at a strategy. I will say that those have gone slower. The interest in those has been slower than those that we have up north. And again, I think it is because they don't have the basements underneath. I think people see the opportunity to expand their homes, and so they're willing to spend a little more to get those unfinished basements. And so that one's been a little bit of an interesting one for us. And so I'm actually going to host an open house there next week to start getting people to walk through. I did host a realtor open house, but I'm going to open it up to the general public and see if we can't get people at least to walk through them, because they are really nice homes built very, very well. And I think if people can walk through the door, they'll be able to see and understand that just a little bit better.
Okay, great. And talk a little bit more, if you would. I'm really interested in how you got two communities that were adversarial in nature to come together, because that exists across the state. You know, communities have rivalries from the 60s that they can't get over and won't work together because of something that happened on the football field back in the 60s.
Right.
Who initiated that? Was it just a magical thing? Was it a process? How did that come together?
Well, I will tell you, our county has been working together with the entity Dawson Area Development for a long time. And because of that, relationships have been built. And Cozad and Gothenburg, like I said, are extremely similar. And we have leaned on one another. And we understand that what is good for one is good for the other. And I'm not going to lie and say that those rivalries don't still exist. They do. And if they were recruiting a project, they would both go after it with the same gumption. But if they knew only one of them was, the other would be supportive. And we have a lot of people that either live in Cozad and work in Gothenburg, or work in Gothenburg and live in Cozad, and vice versa, that we are very interdependent upon one another. And what's good for one is good for the other. The other side of this is sometimes when you're a small community, you don't have the capacity to give a builder, say they want 15 or 5 or whatever that number is. Maybe I can't do that on my own, but being able to sell that within 10 miles, I can give you that 15 or 5 or whatever that magic number is for that contractor, that developer, whoever it is. And I think that we have to be mindful enough that it's going to take all of us working together. And it doesn't matter if we're competing. There are pros and cons that probably anyone would give for Gothenburg. There are different pros and cons that someone would give for the community of Cozad. But at the end of the day, what happens in either community is really good. And, you know, would you rather drive 10 miles to get something or 50 miles to get something? And so, you know, I think that we have to really understand that this isn't about me, Robin Geiser, you know, Joe community member or whatever. This is a much larger picture. And if we want to create opportunities to grow our communities, to attract new families to our communities, to bring kids home, we're going to have to work together to do that. And I think at the end of the day, most people will get there and understand that. But I will also tell you, if it's on the field or on the court, there's still going to be that sense of competition.
Understand. So any final questions for Robin? Well, if there are no more questions, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box. If you're in the process of answering something, continue with that. But Robin, I do want to say thank you. And as we begin to wrap up the webinar, just say how much I've appreciated your presentation and knowledge and hearing about all the good things that are going on over in Cozad and Gothenburg through your work and your entity's work. So you're very much appreciated. So
thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I do want to start wrapping up the webinar. So this webinar, as well as all of our past webinars, can be found on our HomeNE.us website. So feel free to check that out. That will be posted maybe by early next week. And then also want to just give you a heads up. Our next webinar is Thursday, July 20th. We'll be joined by Mary Wilson from the Keith County Area Development. And she will be also joined by Brian Bassa and Tim Holzfaster. I hope I pronounced and did those names justice. I practiced, but so anyway, feel free to join us for Mary's presentation. And Brian and Tim are going to be talking about some really good things that are happening in the Keith County area, especially in Paxton and Ogallala. So I'm looking very much forward to her presentation next month on July 20th. So, and then next week, we will be in Central City at this time, going and conducting our spring gathering. And I am so excited. Our staff is excited about this opportunity. And what is even more exciting is that as of this morning, approximately 24 communities will be represented from around the state, will be represented at that gathering. So it will be a great opportunity for many of you to connect with individuals from around the state, interact with individuals, sit and hear different presentations. It also means that many of you hurried up and registered for the gathering. So we are nearing registration capacity, and the window for registering will be opening soon, or will be closing soon, excuse me. So there are only a few spots left for next Thursday in Central City. So thank you for your passion and interest around next week's gathering. Sharon, if you're still with us, do you have anything to add to that about the gathering?
Well, it has just been really exciting to see people registering while they can still get in on the early bird pricing, and just the variety. I think it's going to be good information. I think it's going to be good sharing of, hey, this is what I have going on. What do you think? Oh, we had that. Let me tell you what I found, just that really good sharing, and somebody being able to bring an answer and you didn't know to call them and they didn't know you needed the information. So that's the real value of getting together. We will be having the ribbon cutting. McHarg Builders Inc. has built 6 houses in their 26 lot subdivision. 6 of those have been funded with SCED's Rural Workforce Housing Funds and NIFA funds. So we'll be hopping off during our bus tour in the afternoon to participate in that. And I hope you all will enjoy that. They're preparing all the boards with the blueprints of all 6 homes because only one will be open. But we are excited, like Lori said. Unless we can figure out a second mode of transportation, we're kind of limited by the number we can fit on the bus. And so that's filling up quickly. So if you want in on that, I suggest you get registered really quick. But we look forward to seeing all of you. And if we can't see you next week, then we'll see you in July.
The 24 communities that are represented, in several instances, we have more than one individual coming from the community. So I think it will be a really rich time for networking and discussion. So I'm excited for the opportunity to see new faces and familiar faces next week in Central City. So with that, once again, Robin, I just want to say thank you for your time and for your presentation. Very much appreciate it. And do you have anything else to add?
No, just thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you either in Central City next Thursday or on next month's webinar. Thank you for coming and attending today.